everyone. I'm Vera, and welcome to the 8th online talk organized by Doctorate Association. And please note that this talk will be recorded. Doctorate Association is a politically independent, not-for-profit organization with a collection of over 4,000 PhD members, as well as professionals and experts. It is a global platform for international doctoral students and scholars to thrive career-wise as well as personally. This talk is called the Doctorate Association Online Salon. It is an online knowledge share meeting held every month, and it is freely open to everyone. Today, we have Sarah to give us a talk about climate change and food. Sarah is a passionate environmental professional with interdisciplinary experience. Her academic background includes a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies and a Master of Science in Food Security. She is currently pursuing her PhD at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, looking into the role of alternative foods in the UK diets, considering health and environmental aspects. She has extensive experience across the environment, food and safety and security, and nutrition issues in the private sectors, NGOs, and the UN system worldwide. She also has a strong swimming career, and she has represented her own country on the world stage. Without further ado, I will hand this to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Vera. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I cannot. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much, Vera, for introducing me. As Vera mentioned, my name is Sarah Nájera, and I'm going to give you a broad talk, I guess, about environment, climate change, food, and nutrition. So just to give you a bit of an outline of how we're going to go today, I just thought it would be nice to sort of like give you a big overview of everything I've done throughout my career and like my academic background. So I'll give you a bit of background on what is food and environment, then food and environment across my academic and working career, how it has changed over time. And I thought it would be interesting for you guys to hear about how it's working for FAO in the UN system. Then I'll tell you a bit of my PhD plans and work. And finally, I'll tell you a bit of what I've done outside of the sort of like working arena. But ideally, I just want to sort of like give you pinpoints of a bit of everything and then concentrate more on like questions, because I think then it will be easier to know what you guys are more interested. So first of all, I would like to like know from all of you who likes food. And I cannot see my screen, but I think Vera can help me like sort of like count. Or if you guys want to like type it on the chat box, who likes food? I can see Vera's thumbs up. And I hope like other people are also like same, but and yeah, and I think this is like the interesting thing about food. It matters to all of us. We all care about it. We all depend on it. So everything related to it is important for all of us. So just to give you like an overview of the current challenges that we're having in our food system, food production is degrading natural resources. At the same time, we're losing biodiversity. And then we have climate change as the bigger component that is affecting food production, but food production is also affecting climate change. And then on the health aspect, our diets are shifting as well. So we can see a big trend on how it has changed as the demographic has shifted from like rural areas to like the urban areas. And we have changed from those practices of, you know, like producing and like consuming our own food to like going directly to the supermarket and just like get all the ready available food. And at the same time, in terms of nutrition, we see more malnutrition. There's obesity, and we have more non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, some sorts of cancers, and just all together, it's like putting a lot of pressure not only on our health system, but also on our environmental system. So that you see like the importance of food right now, as I mentioned to you, there's two things that we need to consider when we talk about food these days. We have on one side the health and nutritional value. So we need to think of what food gives us so that we can survive and so that we thrive. So like we need to think of the vitamins that they provide, if it has protein, if it's a carbohydrate, if it's like a fat, like what will that cost depending on how much I eat, the minerals that it provides, and now that it's like a new topic, the probiotics and microorganisms that are within this food. But on the other side of the scale, when we think of food, it's also how we're producing it. And we have all these other things that you probably have been hearing more and more often. And we think of food production, and it's also greenhouse gas emissions, is land and water use, is nitrogen footprint, resource degradation, and biodiversity loss. And food cannot exist with one or the other one. And afterwards, I'll explain you a little bit more about like each food component once we reach on the aspect of my PhD. But for now, I think this is like the big overview that you guys need to know. So I thought it would be really nice to just sort of like I put a timeline of how my career has progressed. But within this timeline, I added how food and the environment have also transitioned. So it's like really interesting how it has changed, because when I started studying my bachelor's in environmental studies in Alma College, this is in the US, by then the idea of environment and food didn't really exist that much. You would talk about food waste and local food consumption as part of the conversation of environmental problems, but it was still not a big thing. And we would definitely not talk about how food and environment influence each other. So when I finished my bachelor's, I had to go and find a job. And by then I went back to Ecuador, where I'm from, and it was really difficult to find a job. And like my only opportunities were either working on the minery sector or the fossil fuel sector. And in my head, I was like, I'm just not going to work on that. And the only job that I found by then was in a flower company as a sales representative. And after a full year, I found a master's in food security in the University of Edinburgh, where it was one of the first masters where you could see some of the links between food and environment. And through the masters and after the masters to that period, I worked as an environmental independent consultant doing environmental impact assessments in mainly a flower company. And I also started a little project on a zero waste type of consultancy where I helped a little cafe in a gym to sort of like transition into a more of like a zero waste type of cycle. And in between my masters, I started teaching at the university, and here is where I started like seeing, oh, like the food is becoming more of like a sector where like people are connecting the environment and food. And in Ecuador, I taught about Andean agriculture, the importance of the nutrients that you get from these products and how you produce them. And then I also taught about hydroponics, which is a big topic these days, which is growing and growing, especially now that we are considering the lack of space and where we're going to produce more food. And organic agriculture, that is an important aspect, but it often brings a lot of questions on like, should we all consume organic? Can we produce enough organic food for everyone? So it's like where I started to see like how these different fields started to like get together so that we think of like how we produce more food and how we feed everyone the right way. And then right after my my position at the university in Ecuador, I got an internship in FAO. And when I started in FAO, I was just involved in the nutrition division. And and I'll explain you each of the roles because I thought it would be interesting for you to like hear about the differences of the roles within the same organization. But just to like connect back into the link of environment and food, when I started in the nutrition division, there was still not this clear link of nutrition and environment and climate change. And similarly, until food safety, I was still sort of like struggling to like find these links within the organization. And slowly is really interesting how this has progressed. And like to the point that like now I have a part-time position where my title is nutrition and climate change consultant, where I'm like working on a daily basis on topics related to nutrition and climate change. But then at the same time, I also found my PhD that is on nutrition and climate change. And when I was applying for this PhD, there started a lot of different PhDs on the topic as well. So like through, I guess, the past 10 years, we can clearly see how from thinking of food as just like how it nourishes us and, you know, how it's a cultural thing and how it makes us happy, I guess, and fulfills our needs, slowly has become at the center of the agenda for many organizations, but there's still so much work that we need to do. And I'll explain you just now, after I give you a brief of FAO, I'll explain you a bit of like the importance of food. But yeah, let's go back to FAO. So what it is to work at FAO, and it varies depending on the position. And I'll give you 3 examples of 3 different positions that I had so far. So when I started in FAO, I started as a food composition expert or consultant. And basically my day-to-day work was just like looking at academic papers. So just exactly as you would be doing, I guess, your PhD or like doing your dissertation for your master's. And basically all we did is like collect information from all over the world from different samples of food. And the important thing about this job is to look into the nutrient content of different foods and their importance. And this is like very, very important in terms of policies, because as you can see here, we have like 2 different types of bananas. The Utiniap is like a variety that is not commonly consumed, but as you can see, for example, in content of beta carotene, is a lot higher than the ones that you would probably consume by the USDA or this other variety that's lacatan. And this is the importance of this work because like there are certain foods that they have higher contents of different micronutrients. And it's important to keep record of what food actually has, so that when you make recommendations for a country on how much they should be consuming, this would give like a general guidance on what people need and should be eating. And one important like work that we did on that year that I was working, I worked on phytate, which is probably something that most of you have probably not heard about. But when we eat foods, especially in this case, especially grains and cereals, we have the nutrients which are good for us, but we also have anti-nutrients. And anti-nutrients are not generally like known, but what they do is, for example, if we would eat this specific cereal like rice, or we could maybe go like for like a pulse, for example, it has a certain content of phytate, and phytate would bind together to calcium or iron, and then your body would not absorb it properly. So the work that we did with the food composition team by then is to look into different processing levels so that the phytate content would get reduced. And we discovered, for example, that if you soak your beans in water and then you cook them in a different water, then the phytate content reduces. So when you eat that bean afterwards, you would be able to absorb calcium or iron easier than if you would have not done those processes. So this is like the importance of like this type of job. And it used to be some days like, you know, just working on a spreadsheet, but then at the end goal, you know, always know like what it's gonna be used for. So it's like really important. Then the second job that I had in FAO was as food safety consultant. And mainly on my day-to-day, I was just looking at a spreadsheet, collecting data on maximum residue levels on pesticides. That was like one portion of it. And it's also really important because just how farmers apply pesticides into foods, you also have standards that are established by the Codex Alimentarius, and they will tell you what is like the maximum limit that a country should have in their products, so that we as consumers, we can actually consume them. So it was really interesting because we compared only on rice, but we compared the different levels that we have from different countries and which countries were aligned to the Codex Alimentarius, that is this international standard. And then the other really interesting portion of the work that I did, we looked into the human gut microbiome. And this was also, again, more like research-based. So again, like sort of like doing another kind of like starting of a PhD, I guess. And it was like a really interesting topic because this is like an emerging field that there's so many gaps currently, because it's just something that we're like starting to discover. But I was looking into the effects of pesticides, like pesticide residues and microplastics in the gut microbiome, and trying to understand if these affect our gut. And if you're questioning and you've never heard of what is the gut microbiome, it's basically just a lot of different millions of microbes in our stomachs. And so far we only know about bacteria, but then we also need to like hear about like fungi and other species that we still need to discover. And these two projects, the maximum residue limits project and also the microbiome project, we would do the research, but ultimately these two components would feed into policies. So we would like help them sort of like unpack these complex issues and then try to identify different policymakers or people that are interested in this topic to like build up policies so that we could engage with a country or like the general public, so that different policies could be changed and aligned with the science that we were like discovering. And finally, the last position, that is the current one that I'm doing now, that is the one that I told you that is already on nutrition and climate change. I thought about showing you a really nice video that we created, which is very short, that would explain a little bit more about this connection between climate change, biodiversity, and nutrition at the same time.
Humankind is facing a perfect storm of climate change, biodiversity loss, and multiple forms of malnutrition. Food is at the center of all three of these issues. To weather this storm, we need to reposition the variety and diversity of foods as central to healthy diets. This is possible if we connect our diets, our behaviors, our food environments, and our food supply chains back to ecosystems and biodiversity, the true foundation of life. Our current actions and policies can strengthen or destroy these connections. To keep everything connected, we need to ensure that our actions and our policies respond together to the triple challenge of mitigating climate change, restoring biodiversity, and ensuring good nutrition.
I really like this video because it just simplifies the topic and like the complexity, like it just puts two things together. And yeah, and this position is really exciting because it's actually in the policies team, and there is a lot of research as well, as you can see in this recent brief that we published. But again, the research fits into the policies, but it's really interesting because we're working with different stakeholders so that we can start talking about climate change, biodiversity, and nutrition within the different fields and try to like think of the three components in whichever working area that you're involved in the food system. So that is like FAO, and then so then I wanted to like just move next into like a bit of like the PhD and the importance of foods. And this is a very controversial topic currently. But here you can see there's an image of a research done by Puraneme that like they compared different animal food products with plant-based products. And this is when the conversation regarding our food choices started to become bigger and bigger. And what they found is that most of the animal food products, as well as dairy and eggs, have a higher environmental impact in comparison to plant-based alternatives such as beans, nuts, and tofu. But the interesting thing that is happening right now is as soon as this conversation started to happen, there has been a boom on the other side of the market. And I added all of these different pictures because this is what's currently happening in the market. It's like we have so many different options of these plant-based alternatives. And the choices is not only happening just in the UK, but it's like happening in Ecuador, like my home country, or it's happening in like Italy where I used to live, and I'm pretty sure that is also happening in China. And every day we can hear about this new product that came out to the market. And this is where my PhD comes, is because there is this big gap that we don't know how these foods affect the environment, if they're better for the environment or not, and if they're healthy for our consumption, and at the same time, if they're affordable. So I'm currently just concentrating in the UK, but I'm looking at the health impact and the environmental impact of these foods. And it's like very exciting because we have no idea. And there's so many products out there, and these will really like put a lot of efforts, I think, into like what needs to come next. And then just to like move on to like something a bit different, I guess. Just wanted to like tell a bit about outside the working arena. As Vera mentioned, I've had like a swimming career for like pretty much since I was a kid, and I really tried to connect my swimming career with the importance of the environment and also good nutrition. And when I say good nutrition, I do try to concentrate into the plant-based nutrition. So I do try to prove it to people that it's possible to like compete and like be strong by eating pulses and seeds and nuts. And hopefully in the future, once I know about a little bit more about my PhD, maybe I'll be recommending as well like the plant-based alternatives, like, you know, like plant-based milks or plant-based meats, if we find out that they are healthy for us and also good for the environment. And just yeah, I also have another video to share, but like this, I started a blog just after my master's, and where I used to write about how I was like making different changes in my life to become more sustainable. And if you want, I'll share the links afterwards. There's a couple pieces of news. Currently, I'm like more active, I guess, on Instagram. But within PhD and working in the UN and like the different things that happen in life, I'm not keeping very much up to date with the blog. But I did wanted to share with you this video that I prepared for the master's course in Edinburgh last year, because slowly I've been trying to like reduce my own waste, and I try to capture everything that I've been doing pretty much for the past 5 or 6 years. And it's more like to try to encourage other people to like show them that it is possible, that it takes a little bit of effort and like baby steps, I guess, but it's possible and we all have a say. And yeah, so I'll just put it on so that you can see it, and then we can move on to questions.
I grew up swimming, and one of the things I love to do the most is open water swimming. I really like it because it makes me feel connected to nature, where I can be part of these beautiful landscapes. And even sometimes I have been very lucky to get closer to these amazing animals. Back in 2012, when I started traveling, and just before the big boom against single-use plastic campaigns started, I realized that in every single place we look, plastic is there. From things I need for the kitchen to toiletries, sports items, it is just everywhere. Initially, I thought that one person could not make a difference, and I really did not try very hard. But eventually, I got motivated because I met the right people around me. I identified those items that seemed easy to change in my life, and I started replacing them one by one. From deodorant to shampoo, toothbrush, cotton buds, buying in bulk, bringing my water bottle everywhere I go, cooking from scratch, carrying my Tupperwares, visiting farms to learn how food is produced. It has definitely been a long journey trying to learn what suits best with my lifestyle and how I can adapt to have a zero-waste lifestyle. Today, after 3 years, I have realized that the secret to a zero-waste lifestyle are first, to prepare ahead of time, second, to reduce your own consumption, and third, to motivate everyone who's around you into this journey. I still have not reached perfection into the zero-waste journey, but I still believe that if we all participate together, we can really make a change into this world.
And I think with that, I'm like happy to like hear any questions. I can see that there's some things in the chat. Yeah, I can see already like 2 questions, which I can probably already answer. In terms of my career plans after my PhD, I have no idea. I sort of like moved away from like the UN to get more into like the actual research because I thought that the field in the plant-based diets is like really, really important. And also to educate myself because I'm like really curious to find out about these different alternatives that we're starting to have, if they're like good for us or not, we should be recommending them or not. So I currently don't know what I'm going to do next. For now, I have 3 years, so we'll see what happens afterwards. And yeah, and I'm glad that you enjoyed the video. It was very difficult to make it. But I probably will stop sharing my video so that I can maybe see if there's any questions.
Oh, so thank you so much for sharing your interesting journey, both in your research and also on your like daily life. And if anyone has a question, please either raise your hand by clicking the button and I will unmute you, or you can type it in the chat dialog. So I can see there are some other questions. Sarah, can you see that? Or
yes. So the question is, do you have heavy peer pressure as a PhD to publish papers? So I'm going to say yes. I just started in April this year, and I'm currently doing like a huge literature review. I've been reviewing like 28,000 papers, which sounds a bit insane. It's taking me forever. But it's like really interesting because every paper that you read that talks about plant-based diets clearly shows the gap on these products, like clearly shows that like we know nothing about it and that we urgently need to have more research on it. So yeah, I think there are going to be like 3 very, very busy years. Thank you so much. I hope that like my research will be useful for the field, and I think it will be useful for all of us, I think, just to like know what we should be eating.
Your current research rather relevant to your previous working experience?
Sorry, what?
So how's the relevance between your current research and your previous working experience?
Right, so I mean, they are connected in the end. what I do see is right now in all the recommendations, like in terms of policies, they are all saying we should eat predominantly plant-based diets and we should reduce our meat consumption. But when you tell this to the people, nobody knows what it is like a predominantly plant-based diet is. And at the same time, by saying that we should reduce our meat consumption, there is a lot of kind of like fight back from like the sector, you know, the livestock sector, on why should we reduce it, right? If we need to feed everyone and protein is important. So it's really connected, because it's like trying to show it to people what's important into like these foods and what it actually means that we should like should we like eat, for example, pulses, and you know, should we all start learning and like soaking our beans every night so that we eat it on the next day? Or is it just a matter of let's just go to the supermarket and get that bean burger because it's like as healthy as eating the pulses?
Could be any policy like to print the carbon footprint or like impact to the environment when some food is manufactured or produced? So just print it on the package so people can know it and like know the nutrition of the food itself.
Yeah. So there's some projects going around, especially in the UK, where they are looking into behavior and like trying to understand if this would actually influence people. And there is a lot of research that is showing that people are getting influenced by this, right? So it is a step that they are trying to think on how to like show the carbon footprint. But again, would be great because then the consumer gets informed, but at the same time people get lost in like what they should do because there's like so much information out there. And when we talk about the environmental footprint, it's not only greenhouse gas emissions that is currently what is happening in sort of like when we're measuring the environment, most of the people are just considering carbon, but we also have water footprint, we also have land use change, we also have biodiversity, which is like a very important aspect of it, but like there are these gaps that like we're not like connecting them together. And I heard a talk the other day which was really interesting because there's this fight between you know, animal-based products and the plant-based products and how we should replace them, but at the same time nobody really talks about alcohol consumption or chocolate consumption or coffee consumption. And I thought it was a really interesting point because these are also drivers of deforestation in some countries. And not only that aspect, but also in the social aspect is like a market that probably doesn't pay the right amount to the farmers. So it's like we all need to like sort of like think of like, when I buy a food, what process did it require to get to the place where I'm buying it? And do I think that price that I'm paying actually paid, you know, the whole process? And with price, there's like another million issues that we need to cover as well, right? Because like I also believe that environmentally friendly should be more expensive. So it's many aspects in the food system that we need to fix, but I do think that as consumers, we do play a huge role. And of course, policymakers and industry should also contribute, but as consumers, we sort of like start the trend on what we want.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it maybe cost more, but sometimes maybe cost less. For example, I think lots of food in supermarket are over-packaged. It's unnecessary package cover on the food and I have to peel it off and I get a lot of rubber gel every day just because of food. So maybe they can just remove those over-packaged packages, then they can save some carbon footprint.
Yeah, I mean, that would be ideal. I mean, if we manage as a society to find a way to like actually just make it convenient for the consumer, but at the same time that is environmentally friendly, because I had a conversation with a woman that she's trying to create a system with like lotions and shampoos, like all beauty products. She's trying to convince different brands so that they could just refill her bottles. And she's doing the whole process of washing the bottles, which I thought is a really cool project because currently, especially in the UK, you do have these sort of like zero waste shops. But for example, if you go to other countries, you don't have these. In Italy, for example, I used to live, there were like maybe just 2, and it took like a lot of effort to just get to the zero waste shop where you could only buy a couple things, but then you still have to go to the supermarket. So then if you're asking a consumer, hey, you should reduce your waste, but to do that, you need to, you know, take a bus like for 45 minutes and go and like fill your containers and then just come back, and it just takes you maybe like 3 more hours in your week, and you're like a busy person, then that's when it becomes complicated. So that's where like the industry has to also like sort of like help into like helping the consumer to make it convenient, but also thinking of the environment.
Thank you.
Another thing I was thinking that having a lot of package doesn't necessarily mean it's convenient for the customers, because most of the time I think that's not necessary. It's like a waste of materials and cost, and also you have to make effort to open it and then sort it out to the bins. And maybe if you like need to recycle it, it takes much more time. It's not convenient at all. Like rather, if maybe like, for example, for me, if I buy just one portion of food just for myself, it's much easier for me just use a bag to like grab small portions of things rather than just have a package of a lot of things. But I remember in the UK, it's not very convenient, at least initially. Like most of the things they sorted out like in a box, and you just grab that, and you don't have much choice. And actually I have another thing want to discuss with you. There is a figure you mentioned in this presentation that like meat has generally produced more carbon emissions, but the same food can have a range of impacts. It's not, for example, like the no impact beef would be like less than the high impact chocolate. So where is come from? Like, is it from the process of preparing the food or producing the food, or can you explain more on that?
Yeah, so this is the hardest part of the field, I think, because and that's why I don't want to get anywhere closer to the meat production or like, you know, any of the livestock. But this is the interesting part, because like, let's put 2 good examples that I think will help like explain it a little bit better. But we have beef produced in Brazil that to be able to feed that beef, you need soybeans, because usually most cows in like highly industrialized systems, they eat this. So you're like producing soybeans to feed the cows. And then you have another system in the US, and they're like very used to like confine them in like very small spaces. So they are actually not like running around the field, but they are just like confined in like a tiny space, and they also eat soy. But then you have beef in the UK, for example, that the majority of it is grass-fed. So what this means is that the cows are like running around the field, eating the grass that is in the field, but they're not confined and they're not eating soybeans. So this is where like the differences make, because when you're like talking about that beef produced in the US, for example, in order to feed that cow, you need to slowly produce the soybeans, which will mean land use change. And usually to produce these soybeans will be in the Amazon area, where it's like highly biodiverse, rich in species. And because we need more and more feed to feed these cows, then they just keep on like moving further into the forest, cutting them down and like producing more soy to then send it to the US, where they are like confined. And that's only like the feeding aspect of it. But then you have the cows that are like a lot of cows in like the same space. So just imagine about the waste of it. So all the waste that they, that they produce, nothing gets done with it, and this contaminates because it's just like too much in like just the space that they are confined. And I don't know the actual facts, but my ex-supervisor from the US, he did mention that it's very common in Michigan to have these systems, these confined cow production systems. They're called CAFOs. And he did mention they've been like doing like water analysis for the past 20 years, because it's been already like quite a long time that he's been doing that. And he can clearly see that with the waste, the water is so contaminated that like for human consumption is like very bad. So this is the aspect of the waste. And then the cows also burp and fart a lot, which is what produces the methane. And this is like the biggest issue about it, because they're confined and they're like producing it all at once, and methane takes a lot longer to like be removed from the environment. So it just like increases all the aspects of climate change. But then when you compare this confined system with the grass-fed ones, like the one that we mentioned in the UK, here you would have less cows because you cannot feed so many in the same field. And then the cows would be like running around eating their grass and hopefully not eating soy. And although they are still like burping and farting and producing the methane, they are not consuming that soy that is like degrading the Amazon, you know, making this land use change for the feed. And that's more or less, I think, like in simple terms. Of course, I'm not like a beef expert on like emissions and stuff, but this like sort of like the broad idea of it. And this is why it's important to know where, if you're gonna eat meat, to know where it's coming from and how it's produced, because by feeding the animal with soy is not only beef, but like chickens are also fed with soy, and salmon is fed with soy, and there's like so many animals that are fed with it. And if you just think like the number of livestock that we have around the world, and if they're all consuming soy or maize, and like in order to like give them enough food, how much space do we need? So that's sort of like how the emissions change, and that's why it's become like such a controversial issue, because it seems like when you compare a certain system, then you really need to know which system you're comparing to. But then it also gives a lot of space for those that are pro still consuming the same amount of meat, despite the fact of like all the environmental footprint that we already know that it has. It gives them that space to like say, well, but you know, if it's producing a different system, it's still okay for the environment, which is true. But then ultimately, the point is that like around the world, people consume way too much, and we just need to reduce. Like it's not a say of like asking people stop eating it for the rest of your life, become vegan, become vegetarian. It's not. It's like just like think about it, how many people we are around the world, and just maybe on Mondays and Wednesdays you can stop eating it, and instead you can eat pulses, which they're like really delicious, and there's so many things to do with them. And then you're already making a huge difference by not consuming that specific meal. So it's sort of like trying to like bring the conversation more into like more of a like a balance. And it comes with every food, you know, like if you love chocolate, chocolate also causes a lot of issues. So then it's also like, don't eat chocolate every single day, but like try to find a chocolate that is produced in a sustainable way, that, you know, fulfilled all the standards, and that, you know, that is fair. And it goes on and on with every food.
Yeah, and also maybe buy food, locally produced food.
Yeah, it's becoming an interesting topic with the locally produced. And again, it depends on which food we're talking about. But for example, for me as Ecuadorian, we have loads of avocados in Ecuador, and I really don't buy it when I'm in Europe. But then there's this like sort of like question mark, and then people are saying that transportation doesn't have so many emissions.
I remember you talked about that story with bananas. You definitely need to share.
Oh yeah, I can probably share that. So when I came to study in the UK, everybody around me, all the Europeans were like, oh, I love bananas. And I was like, okay, you know, like you guys should probably not be consuming bananas because they're not from here. And I had to do a paper for one of my classes, and I decided to concentrate on bananas. And I discovered bananas, their carbon footprint for transportation is actually so low because they are shipped by boats. And it's so low that it makes like really no difference if like somebody from Europe consumes a banana versus an apple produced in the UK, for example. Like it's like very slight differences. So then I was like, oh, okay. So then it's like really important to also know how the product came to where you come from. So like if the product came by boat, it's like much better that that product is produced in a different country and then shipped by boat rather than trying to produce bananas in the UK, because the amount of energy that we would need to produce that banana would be like just insane. But then, for example, green beans in the UK, they come from Kenya, but they are shipped by, they are like air fried. So the flying cost is like a lot higher in terms of emissions than shipping it by boat. So it's also knowing these different comparisons. So maybe if you want green beans, maybe try to get those ones from the UK or from the country that you're from, depending on the food product. And it changes like this food by food. So that's why it becomes a very complex issue, because we are all in different regions. It's like different cultures, it's the foods and choices that we want. And all of these influences are everyday choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like you made such effort to finding out like what's the food coming from and how you can reduce your carbon footprint. But if for like ordinary people, like they're so busy with their work, but they're still interested in climate change and these issues, what your suggestions?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing I think is like try to go a bit back into like the old recipes, you know, like the recipes that the grandmas used to do, just because I feel like pretty much every region in the world has very, very nice recipes on pulses, for example. Pulses is like very recognized that they're like more environmentally friendly. They're actually great crops for like the soil because they fixate nitrogen in the soil. And usually they are also very strong in terms of drought and heavy rainfall. So it has all the ticks. And like probably we start producing just that is also not like the answer, but we already know that it makes a big difference. So I would say like try to like look for like those recipes from your own culture and try to imitate, and maybe just once a week try this new recipe and see how that goes and see if you enjoy it or not. And if you don't enjoy it, then like look for a different recipe. And there's no one size fits everyone. It's like what you actually like and what you actually enjoy. And there's a lot of like misconception that people think that we need to eat protein and it needs to be protein for protein, but we're already eating so much that if you're like eating any type of meat every single day, you're going to be fine eating legumes for one day or just seeds, because anyways, like all the products combined, they already contain their own protein content. So these would like balance out. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you. As Tianqi made a comment, do you want to share, Tianqi?
Yeah, just while you're talking about soil beans and feeding like the cows or any other animals we are eating as like a protein source, I just noticed that on the WWF webpage, they said in fact almost 80% of the world's soybean crop is fed to livestock, especially for beef, chicken, egg, and dairy production, milk, cheese, butter, yogurt. So it is a really large amount, 80%.
It's huge. It's huge. And it's really interesting because up until maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, we were just talking about, you know, livestock itself, like beef, chicken, until there, you know, like maybe like some fish in there. But it's like very recent that we also started adding into the equation like milk, cheese, butter, yogurt. And before, most vegetarians used to be like, oh, so I'm good, you know, I'm not eating animals, but I'm eating the dairy, so it's okay. And that actually is like, I'm guilty for that actually, for like the gaps of knowledge that we didn't know. And I used to be vegetarian for a very long time, but I used to consume a lot of dairy. And now that I know that it's a big footprint, I also love cheese, and I love dairy products itself, but I know that it has a really high carbon footprint as well. So I am trying to reduce it. And, you know, like today, instead of choosing eating a grilled cheese sandwich, I'm going for like a sandwich with like hummus and some vegetables. And it's just like trying, it's interesting because at the beginning you feel that like there's no replacement for it. But as you start exploring other products, you find like some really interesting tastes. And like for me, like a huge discovery was fermented products, especially when I started doing that research that I mentioned on the gut microbiome. I was working with a colleague that she is very into fermentation, and I was introduced for the first time into tempeh. That I don't know if you've tried it, but it's traditionally from Indonesia, but it's like mixed with a fungi, and it sort of like ferments, and it has like a nutty flavor, and it's great for like just, you know, like a sort of like Asian dish. It's like amazing. And yeah, and then there's like kombucha and like water kefir, and so many new products are coming out. And it's an interesting field as well, because those industries that are also looking into the plant-based alternatives, they are looking into producing meat, but based on fermentation. So they're like either using mushrooms that are fermented, or just like a specific food product that is fermented. And I think it's going to bring a lot of interesting healthy options for the population. So it's like just giving it a chance to try. And if you don't like it, try a different thing. There's like enough things out there these days that you can try.
Yes.
And kimchi.
Yeah, I have my question. So I think it's actually, it's a not easy thing to let people change their diet like from like food or meat based to really plant-based, because for different countries they have different history in food. Their cultures let them like be ready, prepared for some food, and they have many options. For people that live here, they have many options to have milk-based food. Well, for example, in China, there is a lot of option on soy-based food. And people by nature, because they don't have the same options, so they will take a different amount of different foods.
Mm-hmm.
So there's well, in my mind, it looks like a very huge work to let people change their food culture. How do you think about it?
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I was thinking about the same thing, but on a different perspective, because I noticed that different people have different like preference in terms of food. For example, Germans love meat, sausages and that kind of thing. And people from the UK like fried things, very oily things. And in China, from like maybe where I'm from, we like spicy and salty food. And then I realized when we were little, like when we were a baby, we do not have these preferences. And then we eat whatever our parents gave us. And so this made us have these preferences. And I think then we can change. If we just eat one thing and keep on eating it, then you probably will love it. Another example was avocado. When I maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, when I just moved to the UK, people there eating avocados, but I didn't know that. Then I all the advertisements saying like it's so healthy and everything, and then I started eating it, and then I love it. And then when I came back to China, now people here love avocados, and we grow avocados as well. So I think like so I think like this your preference on food can really change it's not as stubborn as we thought. And given the current situations, maybe it's time to create a new healthy and environmental friendly like diet.
Yeah, so like there is a lot of, like, for example, the Lancet, they released like what the perfect dish looks like. Well, not the perfect dish, but like the more sustainable and healthy dish looks like. And it got a lot of comments more on like the affordability aspect, because like, for example, for many families, affording like fruits and vegetables is like a big portion and it's really expensive. So that's where like policies come through, because if policymakers don't actually make this easier for people to consume more vegetables, for example, or more fruits or more pulses, and if it's cheaper to buy a bag of crisps rather than buying fruits and vegetables, then the system is wrong. Like, that should not be the cheapest option. And there's like a lot of like different trials that they're doing, especially in the UK. I think they're like working a lot on like how to like sort of like nudge people a little bit more. But at the same time, I think from the policies aspect, there's a lot of like just sort of like people are just forgetting about it. For example, at COP, this is something that should have been discussed. Meat consumption is like a big thing. And I mean, we did a huge, I guess, like history, I guess, in the sense that we started talking about coal, but like we should have spoken about coal like 10 years ago. And this is how slowly we're moving things to actually like work on the environment. And I think about what you mentioned, Vera, about like people just getting used to like new foods. I think that's like the important role of parents, I think, with their children. And there's like a really interesting thing that I discovered when I was working in FAO, that if you want your kids to enjoy pulses and to sort of like get used to the taste, apparently it's something that you sort of like acquire. So you should be giving your children pulses once they start eating, you know, on month number 6, once they start like eating normal foods. Mm-hmm. You should be giving them pulses because it gives that acquired taste. So like when you're like very windy, I don't know what that was, but when you maybe eat it when you're 15, if let's say that there was that big gap, your body will sort of like recognize that taste and will actually enjoy it. But then you do hear of a lot of people that they say, oh, but I just don't like the taste of it. Or many people, which is not even the taste, but they say, I do love the taste, but it just makes me feel bloated and like I just can't take it. But then it's really interesting because this comes to like your bacteria in your stomach. And if you're feeling bloated, it means that you haven't eaten it often. So then you don't have the bacteria that helps you break it down. And here's like the lack of knowledge as well. If you're struggling with eating, like, for example, a cooked pulse, if you soak it and then you eat it, it's going to be easier to digest. But if you actually ferment it, it's even easier to digest because the bacteria are already sort of like breaking out the composition of the bean. So then once you eat it, it's going to be a lot easier to eat it. So it's sort of like teaching people these little things on how we make these changes. And then if you find like a little stone on the way, which ways you can like get rid of this stone so that you can like actually eat these different foods.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting. There's a lot of thoughts from your talk.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I mean, if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer, and like would be really happy to share once I like know more about like the alternatives as well.
I guess a good approach is to advertise more about the food cultures that enjoy vegetables more than meats.
Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing. And I think that's something that I do try to like do often. I think more with pulses because I'm like cooking pulses all the time in my house, I guess, but it's always trying to discover a new recipe from like a different cuisine. And, you know, when I mentioned, you know, just do an Asian dish, I mean, you guys like from China, you have like a million different ones, which I should probably like learn every single, you know, because for us, like on the West side, I guess it's like, we always just like market as like one thing, but then there's like so many different dishes. And for example, when I traveled to Korea, I discovered this whole new amazing cuisine, and they do a lot of fermented things, and desserts are like, you know, and I think in China it's pretty much the same, that you also eat like bean paste, and they're like different flavors that we don't know, but they're actually really healthy. And it's sort of like just being a little bit more open-minded and like kind of like sharing a bit of like that knowledge, and with different regions, different areas, and slowly try to transition. But yeah, without education and some help of the government, so that these healthy products are more affordable for the people, but at the same time also giving the fair price to the farmers, right? So it's like the whole system needs to improve.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much as well.
Thank you. So I think we are about running out of the time. So let's thank Sarah again for her excellent talk. And if you want to contact Sarah, please find her on her Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, right?
Yes, if you want me, I can like share. I can probably share with you via the presentation, and then if all the links are there, and then if people would like to contact me, please, if you have any questions or anything, please feel free.
That'd be great. And if you are interested in doctorate association, please follow us on WeChat, and you can find that, just type Chinese 博士联盟 on WeChat. And thank you all for joining this talk, and we will have more talks later this year. Please keep in tune, and see you next time.